So I guess that's asking, when you first get a garden plot and you're unsure of what type of soil you have, how would you determine what type of soil you have if you're a novice? Melody?
I confess I haven't actually done this at the common table yet. Perhaps it'll be on the list to do this season. But there is a pretty simple soil test. You could probably find how to do it online, where you're just taking a scoop of your soil at a certain depth and adding some water and letting it sit, and then eventually it'll sort of settle, and you'll be able to see kind of the proportions of kind of clay to sand to kind of loam as the dirt settles. And that will give you kind of at least a basic kind of read of like, oh, do I have really compact clay type soil, or do I have a sandy soil? So that would at least give you some information. You can also do like much more complex soil tests as well. I confess I don't know very much about that. We did get one done at the common table, but then I had the results and I didn't know how to understand them. So this would probably be a good point of reaching out to your community and finding people who do know about that and getting their input.
Anybody else? So how to know your soil when you first get your plot? No?
Another thing you can do is see how it reacts with extreme weather. So, I mean, it's tricky because you probably want to start planting right away, and that's great. But, you know, maybe you've done that soil test in the water where there's a lot of clay that seems to settle, and maybe you'll notice it seems like really saturated because that clay doesn't drain very fast. But the cool thing is about compost is that whether your soil has a lot of sand or a lot of clay, compost is going to help with the drainage in both of those situations. And even just chatting to like who gardens around that area, again, connecting to people can be really good. So I remember working out west near the Humber Valley, and that's a really, really sandy area. So we kind of knew that historically, that was the sandbank of the Humber, even up by St. Clair and Eglinton area. So, and Jane, and we knew we were going to have to help enrich the soil because sand drains really quickly, but then, you know, carrots grow really well in sandy soil. So even just by starting to grow, and even if you don't know these technical things, you might see these type of crops did better and those ones didn't. And you can do a lot without a lot of science if you're really observing and watching. Like some people do pH test and try to work on their pH, but often like in community gardens, we don't necessarily need to get that technical because a lot of our veggies will grow in kind of a mid-range, and there's only kind of a few more specific things that might need a much more or less acidic soil. So don't get stuck on that kind of soil science if you just want to start and kind of see what does well.
Great tips. Thank you to both of you. So the next question that I'll be asking is, it's from Grace. I've used coconut coir successfully as a balcony container mulch, along with a mycorrhizal soil. What organic or natural fertilizers can I also use? I grow tomatoes, lettuces, kale, and will be trying beans this year.
I would say fish emulsion and kelp tea. What are other people's favorites?
We've also used fish emulsion, and there was a product made by a company out in, I think they're in Mississauga. It was a compost tea essentially, but my mind is blanking on the name of the company. But it seemed to work quite well on our garden. And you can make your own compost tea as well. I haven't done that myself, but I'm sure that's another thing you can probably find on the internet pretty easily.
Okay. Anybody else?
Sure. straight up, I don't really know how to do the calculations. I can tell you what we used at Flemo. The calculations were already done for me. We used mushroom compost and chicken pellets. There's also, I believe we also did have the fish. I think we called it fish juice that you squirted. We did that as well, but I don't know how to do the calculations. I'm just letting you know the things that were used at Flemo Farm.
I think we were also using vermicompost, so like warm compost, as well as like the seaweed emulsion and the fish as well. So I think those are two great ones, and also using coffee grounds, those are nice as well. And I think using just natural compost and making your own compost is another great way to start doing fertilizers, natural fertilizers.
Melody?
Yeah, just like what Kevin was talking about reminded me of one thing I learned at the permaculture farm I was on. We crushed up eggshells, so save them and then just let them dry and then crush them all up and spread that around where we were planting tomatoes just for some added calcium. So that's a pretty simple one you can do from your kitchen if you eat eggs.
Anybody else? Charles?
So not at Flemo Farm, actually seasons past where I just have some, I live in a top floor house. We have a nice big balcony. I'm doing some container planting. I did a little bit last year and the few previous years, just growing out of Tupperware or Rubbermaid containers. I just, as you just said, my household compost. In the beginning of the spring, I would just keep all of my vegetable scraps, throw them outside, and as vegetable scraps, I put them in the bottom of the containers and then threw my soil on top. And by the end of the season, when I went to the next season, when I went to turn the soil, it had all broken down. There was nothing left. So, I mean, even your own household scraps in your own container gardens works.
Great advice, Charles. Thank you. So the next question is, how about seed starting mediums? What do you recommend?
We just use a mix of like Pro Mix and then kind of half and half. This is not at all scientific, it's just kind of decided half and half with coconut coir, which is like you can buy it in blocks and then kind of rehydrate it, and that helps with moisture retention. So just mixing that, which I've been taught that was a more environmentally friendly amendment than peat, which is not renewable. But then I've since learned there's also issues with coconut coir as well, environmental issues. So it's a bit of a challenge trying to find the materials that are best for the earth. But yeah, that's what we use at Common Table.
Thank you, Melody. Laura, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm just making facial expressions because it's tough when you're like, okay, what are the problems with peat ecologically? And so many of us, like, we want our plants to grow well, but then we want to know where the sources of our materials. So I was just nodding along. I think it's tricky. Coconut coir, sometimes I've had trouble with for seedlings when it's too much coir, but then I've been told by some cannabis growers that they rinse it. And I'm like, okay, do I have time to like rinse my coir 3 times before I start seeds in it? I'd like to, but sometimes I just go with, like, it's convenient to get Pro Mix, and I don't know, it's tricky. I would love it if someone would put their mind to creating like a super absorbent growing medium that's local, that's not peat, just to make you all think.
So somebody please get on that. We need that within the next month. So the next question is, what about companion planting to increase yields and prevent pests?
I'd love to field that one. That's what my Three Sisters mounds are at Flemo. And that is a traditional, as I said, a traditional indigenous growing method. So on my mounds are probably about 8 feet, sort of square, rounded off. And I plant the corn at the top, which grows tall and strong. And then the beans in a circular around that, where the beans use the corn stalks as their fencing. They grow up that, and the vines grow up the corn stalks. The squash in a circle around the base of the mound, and the three are a complete food. What one takes out of the soil, the other one is replenishing into the soil as they break down. So it's its own little ecosystem. The big leaves from the squash keep the heat in the soil, help for the lack of evaporation, keep the moisture in the soil, and keep the ground warm. The fuzzy leaves of the squash also help prevent rodents from getting in. They don't like to touch the fuzzy leaves, so helps them that way. And the three grow in harmony together, and I don't need to keep amending that soil as they break down. That it's its own little ecosystem. I also grew on the corners of each of my mounds a sunflower and an amaranth plant. Those were sacrificial for the seed to also keep pests. A bird's going to go after the sunflower, which is right in front of it, as opposed to have to try and peck away at the corn husk to get at the corn kernels. And it worked. It was pretty cool. It took me a while to actually get them to flourish, but once they took off, they just, every day I would go to the farm and I'd be like, wow, that's like another 3 inches taller than it was yesterday. Just really neat to watch how quickly the kind came together, and how, they just knew, the plants knew how to grow together.
Thank you so much, Charles. Anybody else? Companion planting? We're over the 1:30 mark. For our panelists, do you have a few more minutes to just quickly field a few more questions? This one sort of ties into what Charles was just talking about. And it's from Jewel, who asks, in which situation is biological nitrogen fixation most likely to benefit plants' growth? Which process is a living organism that is part of the biological nitrogen fixation, a pathway in the nitrogen cycle? Maybe you just want to field the first part of that question, just for the sake of time. So in which situation is biological nitrogen fixation most likely to benefit plants' growth?
I'm not sure if I quite understand the question, and I am not super technical in my farming experience. But is this about the benefits of like legumes and nitrogen fixing plants? I'm not sure.
I'm assuming, and maybe also how the plants can actually uptake the nitrogen in the soil is what I'm assuming from the question, is that they're asking. So biological nitrogen fixation. So for example, when Charles was saying that he uses beans, and so those fix nitrogen, but are the other plants actually able to uptake that and benefit from that nitrogen?
Oh, okay.
Is what I'm assuming. If the question, Jewel, if I'm incorrect in my understanding of your question, you can send another question in there. So I just thought that Charles's example was an example of that, if I was understanding the question correctly, of the Three Sisters as an example of the beans fixing nitrogen and then feeding nitrogen to the other plants that he grows in the Three Sisters mounds. But sorry, go ahead, guys.
I think that would be my understanding, but again, I don't have this background in science. But that there are certain plants that have that gift to give to the other plants of fixing the nitrogen. There's also ones that have deep tap roots, so they can draw up nutrients from deeper in the earth. for the other plants. I know comfrey is one of those. Yeah.
Thank you, Melody. And Charles, you had your.
I don't know the technical or the science directly behind it. I can just tell you that the plants flourished and did great, so it worked.
I think the other part of that is around crop rotation. So when we only grow the same family of plants or the same plant every year within the same soil, same location, you're kind of reducing the biodiversity of the soil life. So it's not specific to nitrogen, but it relates to nitrogen and other nutrients. When we rotate those crops through, when a new plant family is interacting in that soil, basically new organisms are like they're thriving and they're interacting with those roots. So each time when we rotate, we get a bigger diversity of those nutrients, and that will enhance each next crop that comes along. It will enhance the availability of all the accessibility of the nutrients in the soil. So it's not really specific to nitrogen. The flip side of that is when we use nitrogen, like synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, such as what, chemical industrial agriculture does, we basically destroy that relationship where the soil is kind of like, oh, you don't need us anymore to give you the nitrogen. So that interaction kind of becomes inactive. So really, really stay away from overly I don't know the word, but it's like plant steroids, like Miracle-Gro. It's I could make a whole case against Miracle-Gro, but it has to do with, you don't want to interrupt that interaction of the nutrients and the roots.
Thank you so much. So just one more question, guys, when I promise I'll let you go. But I thought this was an interesting question. I'm sorry, guys, if I don't get to everybody's question. I know you had a lot of questions for our panelists, but in the sake of time, I will close out with this one question from Matthew, who asks, what are some of the potential problems with urban gardening?
I think from my experience and having like an urban farm in the public, I feel like stealing and vandalizing is kind of a huge one, where our farm is not gated. So there has been a lot of times where people would just come in and harvest randomly and just like kind of steal crops from us. So vandalizing is pretty a common problem. And also contaminated soil can be another huge problem because, with the city and everything, it's kind of polluted. It's more polluted than it is in rural farming. So I think that it's hard to actually have good soil in the city rather than, I think those are like two of the potential problems that we would have urban farming.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Anybody else? Charles, go ahead.
I think bureaucracy and red tape get in the way. Flemo was the concept of it, I believe, was 2011, 2012. And last year was the first year, and I knew nothing about that, and I had nothing to do with the dealings on the how it became to be. But I've learned that over the past year, that how much red tape there was to get Flemo Farm approved, because it's located under the Hydro 1 corridor, which is right beside the Toronto Hydro. It's in a city park, and trying to get all of those people together at the same table to, well, we don't want this, well, we want this, well, we don't want that, to get it actually approved took almost a decade. And once they actually got it done, Flemo was such a great success last year, and it can prove that it can happen and should happen all over the city and in every little park. I mean, grass is great, but I'm not eating it. So, and in Flemo, as Kevin just touched on, vandalism and people just helping themselves to it, we do have a fence up, and I'm sure that people did come in, I'm sure people did take things, but it wasn't like it was completely ravaged ever. me being at the farm every day, I had local people come up and tell me how proud they were of that project. Neighborhood people come up to me every day, and especially in the beginning, they would come up and, well, what's going on? What is this? What's happening here? Because they didn't know. And by the end of the season, they'd be like, hey, Charles, what are you harvesting today? So I actually became part of their community and actually got to know the neighborhood and know a lot of people in the neighborhood. And the way Flemo was run, it became a sense of pride for the neighborhood. And yeah, so it can happen. It should happen. I hope that there's not too many more red tape. There's much red tape to make it happen elsewhere.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles. Anybody else?
Maybe just a comment about that red tape, to share a little bit about common tables context, and maybe some alternatives or options for a group or if a community group that wants to grow. And maybe for us, it's a church that gives us the use of their land. So, there might be relationships that could be found amongst, a faith group or that actually has a lot of land they're not doing much with. Yeah, like Charles said, lots of lawn around in Toronto. So there is land to use. It's just whether, we can get access to it. So trying to find partners, I think, who are willing to give you that access. Maybe a neighbor, maybe you can grow in somebody's backyard. Just trying to find creative solutions to that. Because the city will be difficult.
Thank you so much, Melody. Laura, did you have something to add? So I really want to thank our panelists who have answered all these questions. Thank you for going over time with us. For everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. We do have 2 more weeks of webinars going on. Right now, our panel could only touch on, we have such a limited amount of time, they could only touch on certain subject matter and also having to answer on the fly. So there are set webinars that deal with a lot of your questions. So please go to the Seedy Saturday website where you will be able to have in-depth webinars to answer all your questions that are much longer presentations and can really go into the topics more in depth. I do thank our panelists for coming today to provide your perspectives, your varied perspectives coming from different angles on this matter. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing your time this afternoon. And I'm going to pass the call over to Rhonda to walk us out or to wrap us up. That's the saying.
Thanks, Chimu. I think before I do thank yous, I just want to show people what you were just talking about in terms of what's available at the Seedy Saturday website. So so people know that there's some locations to do seed exchanges, and there's contact information there for them. We also have library, which if you want to see some other webinars or web pages or download some documents, there's a ton of stuff here that's all kind of organized. Sorry, the Zoom thing is getting in the way here. Other exhibitors. So these are all gardening organizations, greening organizations that if you want to get more resources, you can find out. Oh, and look at, that's familiar, some of Laura's books. People were asking about chicken pellets. Well, there's also a way down here. Anyway, I can't find it. Scroll through, find lots of resources. And then last but not least, all of the other events that are happening over the next 2 weeks, you can register for them here. There's quite a great range of things. Lots of wonderful things happening. Anyway, so on to the thank yous. Thank you so much, Chimu, for doing such a fabulous job of hosting. We had a whole team, and you know, this is one of the things that I'm most excited about Seedy Saturday. It's not about accessing the seeds. It's not about even starting the plants or anything, or all the great knowledge that we've heard, but the fact that this was not one organization, this was not one person, this was a network of organizations from across the city who said, we want to make Seedy Saturday happen. And they were such a great team to work with. So thank you to Shaw for being such a fabulous MC, and all the folks who supported as well. And if you missed Isaac's wonderful talk this morning, hopefully our recording has held up well. We will post it. We were also recording the panel here, so we're going to be able to offer you bits and pieces of some fabulous knowledge. And thanks to everyone for coming out. I hope you get to have lots of wonderful experiences for the next couple of weeks, and have a great garden season. And let's continue to keep getting together and learning from each other. And that's all I have to say. So now that the snow is flying again, we can go back to our seed catalogs and see the online seed vendors and dream a bit more for the upcoming season. And that's it.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you to our panelists for closing this out in such an informative and interesting way. I really appreciate you and your time and all the information you provided to us. Thank you for all our attendees for sticking with us. And yeah, as Rhonda said, thank you to everybody who came from early this morning. Thank you to Isaac for opening us up so well. I am completely tumbling over my words for opening up the session so well, Isaac, and providing such a great keynote address. I thank you all and have a great afternoon. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and please check out the website and join all the great sessions. I'll do a little bit of self-promotion to join mine, which is on pesticides. So if you are interested, please do join on March 10th, I believe. But if not, check out the website to get all the current and up-to-date registration materials. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. I will ask Rhonda and Shah to stay on the line. Everybody else, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great to see everyone. Bye.
Bye. How you feeling, Chimu?
Woohoo! That is a beautiful word. That, like, compared to last year, this was so...
We're still recording.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll chop off the recording. Oh, well, and yours too.